Welcome to Detroit. Doesn't matter if you have one ass cheek and 3 toes. I will beat your ass. You can drown them. And that's what we gotta be. That's who we have to be. Because that's our domain. That is our domain. Because we'll tread water as long as it takes to fucking bury you.
Takes the snap, turns, gives to Montgomery, right side, end zone, touchdown, Detroit Lions! Yes.
We are driven by Detroit.
Hello everyone, and welcome on back to another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. I'm your host, David T. Pike. And as always, we're diving on in. So folks, as I said earlier in a post, I am sorry it has been quite a while since I was able to actually put out some content, but I've been recovering not only from some physical stuff, but also from the fact that I had a long journey coming back to Fort Drum after my vacation going home for my birthday. So I was trying to physically get back into a place where I would be actually able to give you guys some good quality content, but now I'm back and we're going to have some conversation about what I have been able to think about in that time frame, because just because I'm not making content doesn't mean I'm not researching, doesn't mean I'm not doing stuff. I definitely still am doing those things. So I decided I wanted to talk about this particular topic because when it comes to the NFL, there's always, it seems like, trends that are being set. It always seems like there's something new that's being tried out. It always seems like somebody is trying to go in a different direction one way or another when it comes to a certain aspect of football. Whether it's how a team is built, whether it's how a team is ran, how a unit is utilized. There are different things that are constantly being used and being done throughout the entirety of the NFL at any given point in the NFL history of, seasons, games, whatever the case might be. So I started thinking about it, and I thought, the Detroit Lions, they're revolutionizing the NFL. They're changing how the NFL is doing things by how they build a winning program, how they build a winning team, a winning culture. And it's not just in one particular facet. It's not just in one particular way. They're doing it in a number of different ways. And it involves a number of different people who have, put themselves into a position to, actually facilitate this revolutionary process. As with anything, you always have to start at the top. You always have to start with the person that's signing the checks, that's in charge, that has all the power, which in this case, that is definitely Sheila. Now, how has Sheila revolutionized how the NFL is building winners? Well, number one, the way that Sheila did it is because she changed not only how the Lions have done things from the past, but she also changed a lot of how owners interact in regards to teams. Now, I'm not saying Sheila's the first to ever do this, but she's one of a very few that's ever done this. First and foremost, the first thing that she did when she revolutionized the Detroit Lions, at least, was when she decided to fire Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn. The Lions have been one of those teams that for as long as they have been a team in the NFL, they will usually wait until the season is done before they decide to fire or before they decide to restart a process of getting a team where it wants to be. Sheila decided to buck that trend, and she decided to say, hey, we're not waiting until the end of the season to decide to move in a new direction. That was what she did when she decided to fire both Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn shortly after the disastrous Thanksgiving Day game back in 2020. That move right then and there already was a big signal to Lions fans that, okay, things have changed. Things are already moving in a new direction. We're already changing how the Lions are doing things going into the future. The second thing that she did, which was a bit of a multi-step process, but again, it showed how she was not only changing the Lions, but also was showing how NFL owners needed to change, how NFL owners had to go about, the whole process of building a team, was when she hired both, Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes. Because we have to understand something here. Sheila did not come to that decision on her own accord. She definitely listened to counsel and went over a whole bunch of different active talking points when making the decision to hire these two men. And she listened to multiple different perspectives. She listened to Rod Wood. She listened to Chris Spielman. She listened to Barry Sanders. She made sure that, okay, I want to find the right guys and the best guys that can actually help in making this team be exactly what it needs to be in order to be successful. Because one of the things I've talked about on my channel before is that when it comes to the Detroit Lions, their culture, their identity is one that is definitely something that has to be unique, and it has to be to the area of Detroit. It's not something you can just transplant from somewhere else. The Lions had tried that for a number of decades. It had not worked. They had to find something that was actually born and bred here in Detroit. And that is exactly what they did, and that is exactly what Sheila did when she listened to the counsel of Rod Wood, Chris Spielman, Barry Sanders, and many others when she hired Dan Campbell and also Brad Holmes. Because she had to find guys that not only understood what Detroit was all about, but they also had to understand that, hey, we cannot come in here with a preconceived notion about what it is we're trying to do. We have to build things the exact way they have to be built, which is, hey, it has to be genuine to Detroit. So Sheila definitely had a huge part in this revolutionizing process that the Lions have gone through, and at the same time that I would also say that NFL teams are now going through the exact same thing. That then brings us to the next individual. Not necessarily the next individual in the hiring process, but the next individual that I want to talk about, which is Dan Campbell. When it comes to Dan Campbell, how he has revolutionized how teams build winners is that in the past, when it came to coaches, coaches were more about, hey, you know what? I'm going to tell you, I'm going to show you exactly what it is I want you to do. I am going to give you a rundown. I'm going to give you a breakdown of what it is I'm looking for, so that way you, the player, can then make my vision successful on the field. And I'm not saying that Dan Campbell does not do that still. He does. But what makes Dan Campbell particularly revolutionary compared to a lot of his predecessors, not only in terms of the Detroit Lions, but also other NFL coaches, is that he prioritizes relationships with the players and culture building with the players over specifically talent. Now, I'm not saying, again, that Dan Campbell doesn't have a priority for talent, but there is a huge priority about having relationships with the players, having good football morals, good football ethics, and, having the right players that fit the culture of Detroit, rather than just getting the best talent players that are available. And one of the other things that Dan Campbell has done that has revolutionized the Detroit Lions is that, hey, you know what? For a long time, the NFL was all about how can we get faster on offense? How can we get more explosive on offense? How can we finesse our way to victory? One thing that Dan Campbell definitely did that helped bring the NFL back to where its current stage is bring back toughness, bring back grittiness. He not only did that for the Detroit Lions because, again, Detroit is a blue-collar town, but he also did it for the NFL. Again, for a long time, the NFL was going away from the power run game. It was going away from that style of football. It was more about, okay, we're going to try and throw the ball as much as we possibly can. We're going to try and score as much as we possibly can, as quickly as we possibly can. Dan Campbell said, no, you have to have a run game, and he decided he wanted to bring back the power run game. Again, I'm not saying he's the only one who's done that, but he is definitely the one that was a trendsetter in terms of blazing a trail to get a lot of teams back on that particular path. And then the other thing that Dan Campbell has done is he, again, prioritizing relationships, focusing on brotherhood, focusing on team, focusing on family as far as the overall team unit itself rather than over personal gain. Again, this is a problem we still see a lot in the NFL currently right now. There are a lot of players out there that are more interested in what they can personally achieve, what they can personally get, rather than what the team can personally achieve, what the team can personally get. And that is something that the Lions have really excelled at. That is something that the Lions have really been able to blaze a trail in comparison to other teams where it's like, hey, we have players that are more focused on what is best for the team. Maybe they take less money. Maybe they decide to take a back seat to somebody else. Maybe they play a dual role where they're not being a full-time starter. There's a focus on brotherhood. There's a focus on family. There's a focus on the team community, on team unity, rather than the player just getting always what they want. And that is something that Dan Campbell has definitely been able to revolutionize, not only here in Detroit, but around the NFL. The next person to talk about would be Brad Holmes. Brad Holmes is definitely an interesting case in terms of how he has revolutionized the NFL and also the Detroit Lions, because Brad Holmes is a guy that came in as a brand new NFL GM, and rather than going with what a lot of other NFL GMs, a lot of other NFL teams had been doing and had been deemed as successful in the NFL, he decided to say, no, I'm going to go my own way. I'm going to trust my gut. I'm going to go with what I believe is right for not only our team, but also for our culture, such as trusting his gut in the draft, getting players that maybe others didn't think were appropriate at those spots that they drafted, but decided to get them because they fit the Detroit Lions. And we have seen this happen a couple of times over the previous years. We saw it in 2023 with both the drafting of Jahmyr Gibbs and also with Jack Campbell. A lot of people thought that the Lions drafted those players at the wrong spot. They could have waited. Come to find out later that either because of their production or because of what we found out shortly after the draft, or both, that those players were drafted exactly where they should have been drafted. We've also now seen it in this current draft that we just got done with Tyleik Williams. A lot of people thought that the Lions should draft an edge rusher. Brad Holmes said, no, I'm going to draft Tyleik Williams, and now that we've been a couple of months removed from the draft, we can understand and see why the Lions went that route. So again, Brad Holmes is showing that, listen, just because the analysts say this, just because other teams do this, that's not how I'm doing business. I am going to trust my gut. I'm going to go based off of what is best for the team, not necessarily what's best for television, not what's best for rankings, or not what's best for everybody else. What's best for the Lions. And again, another thing that Brad Holmes has done that has revolutionized things is by sticking to his guns when it comes to players itself. Again, one of the things we have seen in the past is how ownership and how GMs can be beholden to the whims of fans. And when it comes to fans, it seems like every so often a fan base will get this kind of like notion of, oh, well, you have to draft this player. Oh, you have to go out and sign this player. You have to trade for this player. Whatever the case might be. Brad Holmes does not play that game. Brad Holmes is like, listen, if it does not make sense for me, if it does not make sense for the Lions, if it's not a good move, I don't care what the fans want. And that might upset fans. But what they ultimately care about is, hey, can we win? Can we get where we want to go? And let's just call for what it is. The Lions have been one of the most successful teams over the last couple of years and have shown over the last couple of years that how they have built their program, it not only works, but it excels. And then the other thing that Brad Holmes does is that he makes smart deals. Again, a lot of people want to say that Brad Holmes is cheap, that he tries to find guys that are injury prone, but you have to take a look at how Brad Holmes has conducted his business when it comes to handing out contracts. Very, very seldomly has he handed out a bad contract. Almost every single contract, the only contract I can think of that he has handed out that was not a good contract was the Cameron Sutton one. But other than that, he has made smart deals in both signing and extending players, bringing them in for good value, and at the same time, they have been able to not only return the investment on the value that was given, but do so exponentially. And then again, kind of working with Dan Campbell is maintaining that football character, maintaining that high moral ethic when it comes to the football side of things, and that is how he makes decisions. Again, it's all about making sure that the culture is maintained rather than bringing in the best overall talent. The next player or the next person I want to talk about is Mike Disner. Mike Disner is a guy that does not get talked about a lot, but he plays a huge role in the Detroit Lions, and he also has a huge role in how the Lions have revolutionized things. Again, one of the things that we have seen over the last couple of years is that the Lions have usually been out in front when it comes to handing out players contracts. They usually, when they do this, at the time when they hand out the contract, it will reset the market, or it will come close to resetting the market. And usually when that happens, a lot of people, particularly Lions fans, will be like, man, we overpaid on this player. We gave too much money away. Well, the funny thing about that is that within a year or two, that contract looks like gold. That contract looks brilliant because now it's like, hey, all of these other guys that have come afterwards, they have completely reset the market. And guys that we thought we signed for top dollar a couple of years ago, they're now like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 down from where the top guys are making their money. We've seen this happen multiple times, whether it's with Goff, whether it's with Amon-Ra St. Brown, whatever the case might be. The point is when we handed out those contracts, yeah, they were big money deals. And of course they still are. But in comparison to now where other guys have made money and where other guys have signed contracts, those contracts look absolutely brilliant. And not only are they brilliant in regards to when they were signed, but also where they are now. But the other thing that's really great about the contracts is they're team friendly. They have a lot of things in them which allow the Lions to work and utilize cap in their favor. And at the same time, it takes care of the players. It makes sure that they're well compensated. So again, Mike Disner is a guy that does not usually get talked about a whole lot. But his role in the Detroit Lions and how he has revolutionized how the Lions not only conduct business, but also how other teams have to conduct business is definitely something worth talking about. Because now that the Lions are a free agent attraction, now that the Lions are a place that free agents want to go, that means other teams have to react to what the Lions are doing in regards to their contract negotiating. And the Lions have become a very good team in being able to do this. And a lot of that goes to how Mike Disner is in negotiating with Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell when they bring in players. And then the final people we have to talk about is the actual players themselves. Again, it's one thing to talk about all the people at the top, whether it's Holmes, whether it's Campbell, whether it's Sheila, whether it's Disner. But again, this is also a reflection on the players, who those people that I just talked about brought in. Those players have to be focused on the team. They have to be focused on team building, team culture orientation, whatever term you'd like to use. They cannot be focused on the singularity of I. They have to be focused on team. And that is exactly what these players are. That is exactly what Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes, Sheila, Mike Disner, all of them have made sure to bring in, and Chris Spielman. They also has to be, again, to further build upon that, the sacrifice of self for the greater good. Again, sometimes players can go out and they can get better money if they were to go on the free agency market. We've seen that with Kirby Joseph. We could have seen that happen with Amon-Ra St. Brown. We can definitely see it with other guys like Jamo or Sam Laporta or Jahmyr Gibbs when their time comes up, or Aiden Hutchinson. But these guys are all more about, hey, what is the greater good of the team rather than what's the greater good of myself? Again, sacrifice of self for the greater good of the team. That is something that has revolutionized how the Lions not only do their thing, but also how NFL teams do their thing. Because again, we've seen it happen all throughout the summer and in past years. There are players that are like, listen, I want what I want and I'm not going to budge. And then what we see is players that are getting traded, or they're only in a place for a year or two before they're traded again. That does not happen with the Lions. The Lions have players that are interested in what is best for the collective unit, not what is best only for themselves. And again, the high morals, the high football ethics. Again, the Detroit Lions have been one of those teams where we don't really have to worry about players getting into trouble. We don't have to hear about players that are constantly having brushes with the law or having issues where they're getting in trouble with the league office. That's not something we typically have to hear about with the Lions. That is a completely different kettle of fish for a number of other teams. So again, the players have just as much of an impact and a role in how the Lions have revolutionized how NFL teams build winners. And how the Lions have done that has now made an impact on how other teams are building their teams, because they want to take a look at how the Lions have done things and they want to try and mimic it. They want to try and copy it. We've seen it especially done this summer with the Chicago Bears. We're seeing it also with the New York Jets. We've seen it with a couple of other teams as well. So it does not matter who you want to talk about here. You can talk about Sheila, you can talk about Chris Spielman, you can talk about Dan Campbell, Brad Holmes, Mike Disner, the players themselves. All of them have a hand in how the Lions are revolutionizing the process of how NFL teams build winners. And they have done so not only exceptionally quickly, but exceptionally well. But anyway, folks, I just wanted to put this out there. This is something that I felt that was worth talking about. So hopefully you guys feel the same. And with that being said, I just want to say thank you all for watching yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. I hope you all enjoyed the content. And if you did, I hope to gain your subscription. But I also hope that you will make sure to hit that bell notification icon if you enjoyed the content, so that way you guys don't miss any more content that I push out. Also, hope everyone has something in their life that makes them happy, makes them smile. God bless, my friends. And until the next time we meet, I'll see you all in the next episode.